Hi, how's everyone out there doing today? This is Amy Hamilton, author of The Project Manager, Life is a Project, and I am here today to talk to you about RACI matrices and swim lane diagrams. The article came out last week on the engineering project management blog post. We also shared it with you on Facebook, so hopefully you had a chance to read it. And today we're really interested in taking your questions and finding out what you have going on. As we've done in previous segments, I have this up as well on the page so that I can see if you have any comments. So looking at the page right now while I'm talking to you. So please let me know what your thoughts are. And we're going to go ahead and get started with why should you use both? So maybe use one or the other when you are doing your project management. So the first part that I want to talk about is communications in general. When you are a project manager, you need to set up your communication plan initially. And the most difficult phase when you're looking at it is when you're doing a handoff. So this is where you really need to start looking at using both of these tools. So when you look at, you have a team and maybe these are the engineers and they're going to come in and you're going to do your initial hardware installation. And after that, you're going to have your software engineers come in and they're going to do the software. What you want to make sure that you're doing is that the hardware engineers are notifying the software engineers when that handoff point is going to be. And that's really the goal that we want to talk about today. How do you eliminate the risk? And you're not going to eliminate it, but you're really going to minimize it. As a project manager, that's what we're all about doing, is managing risk for our bosses so that they can understand what's going on, what it is you're trying to achieve, right? So you want to make sure that you minimize it. So one of the tools that you can use is called a RACI matrix. Has anyone out there used a RACI matrix before? So what you do is you have your different departments that are responsible and say that you put those along the top. So say that you have your software engineers, you have your hardware engineers. Maybe you have some cybersecurity specialists who are going to do some hardening for your equipment. Maybe you have some additional developers, you have outside vendors, and you want to list every single one of those across the top. And then what you're going to list is who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. So we're going to stay with the same theme. So when your hardware engineers are there and they're doing the initial installation, who should they be talking to? Maybe if it's a new hardware installation, you should be talking to your HVAC team. You want to make sure that there's enough power. You want to make sure that there's enough air conditioning, everything that's going to be part of that, right? So you want to make sure that those people are consulted. But who's responsible? Is it the project manager? Is it someone from the hardware engineering team? You have to decide all those things in the beginning. But then who's informed? Who just needs to know? And for instance, in this case, you want to make sure that those software engineers that you're going to be doing your handoff to are aware of what you're working on. Because if they're not aware, then they're not going to know how long it's going to take. When is it going to reach them? And this is really when you want to start using your RACI for that. And we're going to talk now after your RACI, and you have an example in the article we sent you about how to set up your RACI. And one of the things that's really, really important is when you're doing this, you can only have one person who is ultimately responsible. And most of the time as a project manager, it's going to be the project manager. There's a few exceptions to that, and one of which is going to be those major milestone decisions. And when you have a milestone decision point, this is when you want the project sponsor to be responsible. So we have a couple questions that came in. How do you ensure that the work is going right? So there's a couple different methods for ensuring that the work is going right. And that's mostly going to be when you're doing your quality management piece, and you're also going to be looking at whether or not earned value management comes into play. So what I'm going to do is make a note here, and what we're going to do next time is we're going to talk about earned value management, because that's where you can make sure that the work is going right. So today we're talking about the communications piece, how you do the handoff, and what we'll do next time then is we'll talk about earned value management and how do you make sure the work is going right. And that's what you're doing during the controlling and monitoring phase of your project. So the next part that you want to look at is after you've created your RACI matrices is your swim lane diagram. And what does a swim lane diagram do? This swim lane diagram is a visual representation of a process flow used to depict the handoff between departments. So we've already talked about this case example that I'm using, where you have your hardware engineers, and your hardware engineers are handing it over to your software engineers. But who else would you hand this project over to? And you're going to create an entire diagram, and it's going to show every single person as you loop through it, and at what points they have that. So what you want to do is make sure that when you look at your RACI matrix, it matches up to your swim lane. Because sometimes you might be thinking of different things at that time, and what you want to do is you want to put those together. And so you want to make sure that you've married up. And so if you said the engineering department is responsible for something in your swim lane diagram, go back to your RACI matrix and make sure, is that who you actually put as being accountable for that? You as a project manager are generally responsible for the entire thing. Another point is going to be those decision points. So when you make up your swim lane diagram, those little diamonds, the diamonds are the point that represent the decision points. And as I mentioned in a RACI matrix, generally that decision point is not going to be you as the project manager. That is where you're going to elevate that, and that is going to be going up to your project sponsor or somebody who's the decision maker. So the best way to verify that project organization chart is really important. If you don't know how your project organization is designed, it's going to be very, very difficult to do a RACI matrix or a swim lane diagram. You have to know who those elements are. So if you're the project manager, you should come up with a project organization chart and the beginning of the project. If you're having a project that maybe you weren't the initial project manager, or maybe somebody else kicked off the project and it had to get handed to you as a new project manager for some reason, then you're going to make sure that the previous project manager hands you the organization chart. About a month and a half ago, we talked about matrixed organizations, and those can be a little bit messier. And that's where you have someone who is maybe assigned to you just part-time, where you're working with them. And this is really where, if you're going to do a RACI matrix with a matrixed organization, you're going to want to go ahead and look at individuals. So maybe you're looking at just one individual who's a hardware engineer, and you're going to go to his or her manager and say, hey, I need this person, these are the days. And that's where really having that swim lane diagram, understanding exactly when those handoff points are, is so important. And then what you want to do for the RACI matrix is know who has the accountability. I hope that answered your question on the project organization chart, and if you have additional questions, I'm more than happy to address that. But you might be saying, well, why do both? Why can't I just do one or the other? And really the reason is as your overall communication management plan, this is about reducing the risk. So when I was in high school, I used to run track. And when you ran track and you did a relay, you would practice forever just a handoff over and over, handing that baton off to next group. And what you can see in a project a lot of times is if one group is not aware that they're done, and the other group, it should be picking it up, and you don't do that strong handoff, the hardware engineers could have been done 2 days ago. The software engineers don't know. They haven't come in there and started working on the project. And now you have this lag in time. Another thing that could happen is, say that your hardware engineers are running late. Your software developers are sitting there waiting with nothing to do. Maybe you could go back and say, hey, the hardware engineers are going to be delayed a couple days. Does anybody else need the software engineers to do something? And this is where you really want to make sure that you have a keen understanding of the entire organization. So maybe the software engineers can be someplace else in the organization until your hardware engineers are done. And then this way you've really optimized it so you're not having people that you're paying who are sitting around and doing nothing. And this can be absolutely critical with vendors. A lot of times if you're having a vendor come in or a consultant, you could be paying them to do nothing because you have not really looked at your swim lane diagrams and your RACI and those handoff points. One of the other things is when you're looking at your RACI, the people who are consulted, they're generally consulted for specific reasons, and one of those reasons can be for legal issues. You want to make sure that you're getting those experts in there early. And one of the most important things right now, if you are into any kind of IT or networking, So this doesn't apply as much to construction management now, but definitely if you're in any kind of computer technology, you want to consult with your IT network security team. Right now, cybersecurity, the issues that we're having with ransomware, the issues with network security, you cannot over-consult with your cybersecurity team. So make sure you're bringing those guys in from the very beginning. So in my opinion, the main criteria for successful project management, I think traditionally it works well when you look at it, is your project coming in on time or under time? Is your project coming in within budget? Is your project successful? Is it meeting your bosses, your sponsors' requirements, the goals that you initially set out to achieve? So I think those are very important. But I think that there's one thing that you always have to think about as a project manager as well, and that is a successful project is one where you as a project manager feel good about what you accomplished and you had an amazing team. And this is kind of the piece where you walk away, and sometimes you can have a good project. This meets all those standard criteria, but it's not a project that you enjoyed. And for me personally, I love to be on a project where the project team is engaged, where I have a team where I think I would love to do my next project with this team. And that's what I think it comes together with. And good communications can help, because when your team is getting together, when they're clicking, when you're able to say, hey, I know where exactly who I need to go to hand this off, your project will most likely come in on schedule and on budget. So we talked about those delays. Like if you have a team that's sitting around for 2 days that you're paying that isn't working, your project is most likely going to come in over budget. If you had your hardware team go ahead and do the installation, but your software team's not available, you're most likely going to end up with a project that's behind and delayed. So what you really want to do is have that amazing project team where you're all communicating, and those communications are going to lead to that successful project. So project management should have leadership. Absolutely. You as a project manager are the leader. And so today we are focused on this communications piece of RACI matrices, swim lane diagrams, how they improve your project communication. So what you want to do is be able to combine those things, and this is going to allow you a leadership tool. But in the end, you as a project manager, you're leading that project on the path. And then your project sponsor is generally your leader and the person that you're going to be looking to. We can have some additional topics. I'm going to add this to the topic list of additional leadership topics. That's a really good one. And the next one I see is a procedure to be a project manager. So I guess my question in that is, are you looking for certification and to becoming a certified project manager? Or are you just saying, like, what are the process steps in a project, like the initiating phase, the planning phase, the execution phase, the controlling phase, and the closing phase? Because that's the 5 major phases of a project. Then we also have process groups within a project. So the communication process group is part of this. So by the word procedure, I'm not exactly clear, and I also am not as familiar with Prince 2, if that's a Prince term, because most of my project management comes from the Project Management Institute, where I'm a certified PMP through. So if you have any additional questions on that, please let me know. I want to say it's really great when I'm able to read your questions, and I would like to, as always, thank Saeed and the entire project management team for inviting me to be part of this wonderful community of project managers. I enjoy this so much. I've gotten 3 more questions I'm going to go ahead and add for future articles and for future times when we have these Facebook Live sessions. So next week, what I'll do is put out an article on earned value management, how you can use it as a project manager, and then the next week after that, we'll be talking about it again. So thank you so much for having me here. This is Amy Hamilton, the project manager. Life is a project. Check it out if you get a chance, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks and have my article out for you next week. Bye.